Hello, everyone, and welcome to the discussion portion of MPT's Finding Your Roots Season 8 preview and discussion. My name is Drew Null, and I'm a board member and immediate past president of the Maryland Genealogical Society. Now, the Maryland Genealogical Society has been helping folks find their Maryland roots for 60 years now. And recently, we've been very happy to have the opportunity to partner with MPT on a series of workshops that we held last year. And we're very pleased to announce that we have a new 3-part workshop on DNA testing for genealogy that's scheduled, is going to be in June. The registration for that, if you're interested, is going to be opening very soon. And MPT will be sending out an email with more information on this and how to register for it. And I think you will really enjoy it, whether you're completely new to DNA testing or just have some intermediate questions. I think we're going to cover the basics as well as probably a little bit more for those of you that are already somewhat familiar with it. So I hope you have a chance to join us in June. It's now my pleasure to introduce Kimberly Morgan, she is one of the lead genealogists on Finding Your Roots and worked on Season 8. And in addition to her work on Finding Your Roots, she is a contract archaeologist with the U.S. Army Past Conflict Repatriations Branch, working on cases involving missing American soldiers from past wars. Kimberly has collaborated with the Smithsonian Institution, the International African American Museum Center for Family History, and a number of other organizations. And she's the co-founder of an organization called the Descendants of Edgerly Reclamation Project, which works to preserve and interpret an African American cemetery, the Edgerly Cemetery. Welcome, Kimberly.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Basically, what we're going to do is for about the first 15 minutes or so, I'm going to ask Kimberly a series of questions that we at MGS and at MPT were interested in hearing the answers to. And then we'll open it up and start taking questions from the audience. I know that you all are putting those questions to the chat, and they're going to be passed to us. And we'll work with those in the last 15 minutes of our session. So first off, Kimberly, I gave folks a very brief little rundown there of your background, but could you talk a little bit more about your background and the areas of research that you specialize in?
Certainly. I have been working in genealogy or in the genealogical field for about 20 years. And I literally stumbled into it when I discovered a old single solitary tombstone deep in the woods near my home. And that tombstone is in the picture over my shoulder. And when I found this tombstone back in the woods, I became obsessed with finding out everything I could about the man whose name was on the stone and why he seemed to be buried in the woods alone. The man's name was Stephen Binyard. And the first thing I did, I had no idea how to conduct research or genealogical research. So the first thing I did was go to a local library, and the librarian there helped me find an obituary for him. And I found out that he had drowned in 1882. And at that moment, I just became even more obsessed with finding out everything I could about Stephen. Did he have a family? Why did he drown? What happened to his family? And that just sort of snowballed, as it so often does, and into a complete full-blown obsession. And I found out pretty quickly that Stephen was African American. He was born into slavery. He was enslaved. He was born around 1840, and he was enslaved in South Carolina. And in 1861, he was emancipated through the Port Royal Experiment. He joined the Union Army. He served his country during the Civil War, came home, married his childhood sweetheart, got married, had children, and unfortunately drowned in an accident at work. And he was buried in the community cemetery. It's called Edgerly Cemetery. And he's actually not the only person buried there. He's just the only person with a tombstone. But Stephen Binyard is the reason that I'm a genealogist. And he's also the reason why my specialty is African American genealogical research. Not knowing anything about Stephen, and then realizing that there are enormous challenges faced by individuals of African American descent trying to do genealogical research in the United States, it forced me to learn how to think outside the box and how to become very resourceful in finding information. And that is a skill that has served me well. But that's just, and again, as I said, everything just kind of snowballed I went from just researching Stephen to basically everybody in my hometown.
Sure. I mean, basically that trouble that you were having in getting started in looking for information for him, I know that that's informed your process for uncovering someone's history. I mean, when someone comes to you and says, "Could you help me find my path, find the history of my family?" What's your process for then moving forward with that?
We start with basic information. What do you know? Do you know your parents' names or no? Do you have any information at all? And the first thing that we do is we go to any number of genealogy websites and we try to identify those individuals and records. Now it's the 1950 census, before it's the 1940 census, and just try to build back as far as we can through the paper trail. I also love to use genetic genealogy to help with genealogical problems. DNA is a personal choice, but if you choose to take a DNA test, it's a revolutionary tool in genealogical research, especially for individuals of African American descent in the United States. It has allowed us on the show to tell stories that we've never would have been able to tell before.
Now, I know that any of us who have done genealogy for any length of time have the classic moment, the proverbial brick wall, when you hit a
Yes.
wall and you cannot seem to move forward. When you hit a roadblock like that, what advice do you have for folks?
Embrace your fan research, friends, associates, and neighbors. Many times, if I hit a brick wall, I realize I need to back up. And the metaphor that I use is cast a wider net. Instead of focusing on one individual or one area, I back up and I just cast the net wider and I look at who family members, specifically siblings, um, associates. Do I know where this person worked? Do I know where they went to church? Were they a member of any fraternal organizations? Were they mentioned in any newspapers? Any other friends, associates, and neighbors in newspapers? So fan research is my go-to when I hit a brick wall.
And looking at that sort of so-called collateral relatives as well as
Right.
friends and neighbors, et
Correct.
cetera. Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, is there any you've given right in the past couple of minutes a lot of great advice for people who are starting genealogy. Do you have any other tips or advice for somebody who's just getting started?
Just getting started. I mean, genealogy is, it took me a long time to realize this. Genealogy really is a community effort. You can do it on your own. It's much more difficult. If you collaborate with other people, the process is usually a little bit easier and more enjoyable. Some of the best, well, probably the best part of my career and my time as a genealogist has been the people that I've met. And I've met a lot of amazing people there's so many social media groups for all different types of genealogy. Like if you're from Italy, if you're from the Philippines, if you're from Scotland, there's specialty groups, so to speak. There's just general genealogy groups, general groups like CC Moore, our DNA expert, has DNA detectives. You want to learn more about DNA. There's so many groups where you can connect with people, and maybe they have that piece of information or that help that you need. And the other thing is to try to find a research partner, somebody else who's researching the same family or family line, and see if they'd be willing to collaborate with you. I have a research partner now for Stephen Vineyard. It's his great grandniece who I found. She's living in Atlanta, and she's one of my closest friends, and we met because of research. And we split the workload. And so try to find people to collaborate with, join online groups if you can, social media, and also go to your local resources, your local library, your local genealogical society. If you have a family history library nearby, walk in and ask for help. There are so many people who are more than willing to sit down with you and walk you through the steps. Genealogy can seem very intimidating, but just break it down into smaller steps and get some help, and it becomes a very enjoyable process.
Now, I know that because of your role on Finding Your Roots, that folks are probably interested in anything that you can tell us about the program. Are there any particularly favorite stories that you have from season 8, from your work on season 8?
That's hard because there were so many amazing guests and amazing stories. Season 8, I'm always surprised our guests always surprise me. We have such amazing guests with such interesting and diverse backgrounds. I really was tickled with Terry Crews's research. When I found this newspaper ad for his great grandfather who had his own business, it was just this cool ad. They showed it on the episode. And he really liked that as well. Pamela Adlon sticks out because Pamela Adlon had been waiting to be on the show for about 5 years.
Wow.
And she was trying to find out the identity of her maternal grandfather. And we were able to solve that question for her. There are a lot of really old-fashioned detective work. And then we also had an amazing story on her father's side. Her father was Jewish. His family was from Russia and Ukraine, but they weren't sure of the exact details. And through DNA, we were able to identify a cousin and make contact with him. And he and his family had come to the United States from Ukraine in 1979 and brought with them a suitcase full of family photographs and documents. And they were all about Pamela's family. And these are photographs of her 2 times great grandparents. And it was just sort of like a genealogical jackpot. So that was a really fun research to do. And Rebecca Hall, I mean, everybody had just such amazing, Brittany Packnett Cunningham, Anita Hill. I mean, Anita Hill's research was, everybody's fascinating. But yeah, Pamela Adlon sticks out the
Can
most.
you give us any hints about season 9? Can you give us any tidbits about who might be on the next season?
We are working on season 9 as we speak. And Carol Burnett, we filmed with Carol Burnett. She will be on season 9. A lot of people saw the picture of her and Skip, Dr. Gates, that was on social media. So she will be on season 9. And also Joe Manganiello. And I hope I'm saying his last name correctly, but Joe Manganiello will be on, and he has fascinating family history.
Since we're in Maryland, have you had the opportunity to do much research in Maryland sources or in Maryland repositories?
I have. I actually was working on a project in Maryland last year. I was consulting on a project with the Smithsonian, and that took me to Maryland. And I had the chance to go to the Maryland State Archives and work with an individual, a lovely individual named Chris Haley. And Chris helped build the Maryland's Legacy of Slavery database website, which is one of the most remarkable resources I've ever seen for records related to formerly enslaved individuals and free people of color. But I was also able to be at the archives on site and work with some of the records that are held there. And I also worked with the Maryland Land Records website, MD Land Recs. That's another fantastic resource. But yeah, so I have worked with Maryland Records quite a bit. The freedom certificates of freedom for free people of color are really fascinating to me, as well as the probate. I love probate records, and there were so many great probate records at the state archives. And Rebecca Hall, a guest on one of our season 8 episodes, had maternal ancestry in Maryland.
Yeah, we're really lucky here in Maryland that a lot of records are public. Vital records, for instance, a lot of death certificates, like pre 1920-ish death certificates are now online. So the Maryland State Archives has really been putting a lot.
It's fantastic. They have an incredible team of people there, and it was amazing.
Well, let's turn now to some of the questions that we've been getting on the chat, and I'll tell you right off the bat that there may be too many questions for us to answer, but let's take a look and start seeing what we've got here. One of the questions that's seeming to come up quite a bit is some issues about some of the European research that's done.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, someone is asking about Italian immigrants, how to go about finding, the specific church or the specific community where you would have where the marriage records would be. There's a question here also about Slovenia, Yugoslavia. How do you start, looking at that? How do you begin crossing the pond, as it were?
Crossing the pond, yes.
Yes. Could you tell how you guys,
Sure.
handle that?
Yeah, our process.
Yeah.
If we had an individual that has ancestry from a foreign country, what we usually do, or what I do, is we do as much online as we can with available resources. Some websites like Family Search have index records. Like, for instance, they have birth indexes for Italy. Other websites like Jewish Gen have a wealth of resources for the Jewish population of people in Europe. The borders changed on so many of those countries over the years that sometimes you have to dig around at different multiple websites. But we work with the available resources that we can online, and we try to build the tree as far back as we can with available online records. Specifically, we try to at least identify the immigrant ancestor. Who was the individual from that family line that came from Italy or the Czech Republic or Britain into the United States. And we also try to identify, really narrow it down to a town if we can, that that person is from or the family is from, or at least a province or a county. And then once we get that compiled as much as possible, we do hire researchers in those countries, whichever country that individual is from. So we have a researcher in Poland, we have a researcher in Italy, we have a researcher in Czech Republic. Who does the boots on the ground research for us, because there is a lot of records that we cannot access online. So we do have to have an individual there. I will say that I am pleasantly surprised always by the amount of records that are online. And usually what I do, is I will, if it's, for instance, Czech Republic, I will Google Czech Republic genealogy and see what pops up. The Czech Republic, for instance, has a number of regional archives that have online records. And Google Translate will translate that website like that. Israel has an Israeli National Archives website that's really easy to use. And I found some incredible records like passports there for individuals of who were Jewish who left Poland and Russia and Ukraine after World War II and came into Tel Aviv. So that's the process for that. There are some places like England or the UK, you can order records from the GRO, which is the General Register Office, and get them sent to you. Of course, there's a cost involved, but there are some places that have records you can order. But like I said, we do as much as we can online, and then we sort of farm that research out to a local person.
And in terms of online, I mean, like you said, there's lots of online stuff. But one of the questions that someone has asked about, knowing if you have limited funds, can you do this? Can you do genealogy these days? If
Yes.
you have limited funds, if you don't want to pay for a lot of different apps, a lot of different programs, how do you
Absolutely.
get started on a shoestring, basically?
You go to your local library first, and you find out if they have a library edition of Ancestry, which is free. You can also utilize Family Search, which is a website that is free to use, and see if you have a family history library anywhere near you. If you go to a family history library near you, they have a wealth of records there that are free to use, and they have individuals there who will help you do your research. Go to your local library and also ask about genealogical resources. Maybe there's a local genealogical society. Network with your local resources to see what's available for help. Another thing is to get online, to go to these online social media genealogy groups in particular. There's Random Acts of Genealogical Kindness. You can just type in like Italian genealogy research and find a ton of groups. Join them and ask your question. A lot of times that's how I get information. Hey, I'm trying to find information out about this guy named Stephen Binyard. Can somebody go and take a picture of his grave for me? People will help you out. So get online, work Family Search, Family History Library, your local genealogical society. When I started, I was on a very limited budget, and that's how I worked the research.
Kind of the flip side of that question is, someone is asking, is it indeed possible to hire? Can you hire a genealogical professional? I mean, to do research on, do the whole 9 yards, help you with DNA, just like, in other words, do your own personal finding your roots kind of analysis. Are there professionals out there, and is there an easy way to access them and hire them?
Yeah, there are lots of professional genealogists. The show, we don't handle private clients. We don't have time, unfortunately. But you can go to reputable websites. There's APG, which is the Association of Professional Genealogists, and you can search for genealogists based on specialty. A lot of people specialize in certain areas, certain countries, genetic genealogy. You can also go through companies like Ancestry Pro. Ancestry has their own division of professional genealogists. There's legacy tree genealogy. There's a lot of professional organizations. Just keep, have an idea of what your end goal is. What do you want? Do you want information? Do you want like a family history book? And make sure you communicate those needs and expectations to whoever you would like to hire, and see what their qualifications are and that they've done that type of work before.
Interestingly, we have a question here about what's about resources for finding Native American ancestors. Have you worked with that at all?
We have a little bit. My husband is First Peoples or Native American. He's from Montana. And typically those records are held, records for tribal members are held at the tribal level within the tribal government, or the tribal government is the word I'm trying to use. There are some records online. You have the Dawes Rolls. You have some applications to become a member of the Cherokee Nation are digitized online through Ancestry, maybe Family Search, I can't remember. You have accepted and rejected. But if you suspect that you specifically have an ancestor who was of Cherokee descent, you need to try to find them on the Dawes Rolls first, which are available online as well. But if it's a different tribe, you're probably going to have to deal with the specific tribe. The other thing is there are Indian census rolls, as they're called, that were taken in the United States. My mind is blanking on the years, but it's the late 1800s, early 1900s. You can try to look for some ancestors if you have names on those Indian census rolls.
Switching up, we have a couple questions here about DNA. For instance, one is very basic. When it comes to genes and genetics, how does this, how does this work? I mean, I know we could do an entire
Right.
half hour on that, but the bottom line is DNA tests do work. They do identify who you're related to, correct?
It's a tool, correct. It's a tool. It is not the be all end all. You're not going to take a DNA test and then a week later, your entire family tree will be handed to you. It's a tool. If you have specific needs or specific goals in mind, it can be a fabulous tool. If you are looking to identify biological family members because you're curious, or maybe you don't know who they are, maybe you don't know who your grandparents are, DNA is an incredible tool to achieve that. If you're looking to push your research back, break down some brick walls, DNA testing is another incredible way to do that. It is a personal choice. There are a lot of options. But we use DNA for every single guest. And it has, like I said, it has allowed us to do things that we never could have done with just paper trail research. It wasn't mentioned on the show, on the episode, there wasn't time, but Lena Waithe in particular, Lena Waithe's mother, her grandparents were both, their surname was both Hall. Her great-grandmother's surname was Hall and her great-grandmother's surname was Hall. They were both from Mississippi, and she didn't know anything about them. So we used DNA to unravel which Hall line went with which great-grandparent because of DNA. And we have done that over and over again. Been able to push lines back and identify lines because of DNA testing and genetic genealogy.
Well, and I'm not going to pass up this opportunity to, again, shamelessly plug our upcoming MGS MPT series on DNA in June. So you'll be, if you really want to dig a little deeper into this, please feel free to register for that. We also had some questions about African-American research, particularly when it deals with dealing with enslaved ancestors. How do you push back before that 1870 census, which is the first census where African-American the enslaved were actually listed by name? Any advice, folks? General advice?
Learn how to dig and be prepared to sift through probably an enormous amount of irrelevant information, just in the hopes that you'll find a tiny little bit of relevant information. And just look at where if you look at where that ancestor that you're trying to find more information about, where they're from, where they were living, what state, were they in Texas, were they in South Carolina, were they in North Carolina, and become very familiar with every single available set of records for that area. It's gotten to, of course, I do this for a living every day, and I have for several years now. So research is almost like a muscle. The more you the more you exercise it, the better, the faster you become. I can now look at an individual if they're from Texas, and I mentally know exactly what record collections I'm going to start looking for. If I have an individual who's from Wake County, North Carolina, I get really excited because all of their deeds are online, their probate's online. Maybe they have Freedmen's Bureau records. But you need to become familiar with what types of records are available so that you know where to start looking. But pre-1870, you're going to want to look at, is the area that they lived in, are there Freedmen's Bureau records available? And if there are, you might have to go page by page through them because sometimes they're not properly indexed. Maybe your ancestor's in there, but their name isn't indexed properly. Are there Freedmen Savings Bank account applications? Those are a complete goldmine of information. Are there online newspapers that might mention your ancestor? Library of Congress Chronicling America website is free and has newspapers from the 1800s, early 1900s. Are there probate records? Did they ever own property? Did they ever have a crop lien? Did they receive, if they lived in the South in the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor, did they receive their land, a land grant through Special Order Number 15, which is 40 acres and a mule? Do they have a head of family certificate on file? Does your local library have old newspapers on microfilm that you can go through, any type of old obituaries or family records on file? Look at where they lived. What's the closest church? Does that church have records? People weren't very upwardly mobile at that time, so typically they went to church close to where they lived. Look at the church. Like I said, do they have records? Who's buried in the cemetery? If you do find them in the 1870 census, look at the people above them, look at the people below them, research them. That's your fan research. But the other thing is to just cast as wide of a net as you can. I will quite literally Google people's names. For instance, Rebecca Hall had an ancestor named Basil Norman, Basil or Basil Norman. Googled his name, and a ton of information on Google Books popped up because he served in the Revolutionary War. Even a Google search. Jump online to some of these online social media groups for African American research and put the information out there. Hey, I'm looking for more information about, Stephen Binyard, who was born in Beaufort, South Carolina around 1840. I'm not sure who he was enslaved by. See if somebody else has that piece of information that you're looking for. Did they serve in the United States Colored Troops? Is there a pension file? Did you look on Fold 3 at the Confederate citizens letters, Confederate citizens files? Did their enslaver work with the Confederate Army in hiring out that enslaved individual? And the receipts are on Fold 3 in the Confederate citizens files. There's a lot of ways to try to break those brick walls. And this is where that ingenuity comes into play. When I said I had to learn how to dig because of Stephen Binyard, you have to be resourceful. You have to think about every possible angle you can work to get any little piece of information. And then you take that information and you extract as much data as you can from it, and you just build. It's a building process. And I'm sorry, I just spouted off a ton of information really fast.
No, that was great. And I mean, because in a sense, before emancipation, you're researching the white community to try to
Correct.
get hints to
Correct.
the people they had enslaved that you were then tracing forward once you can actually see their names later on.
Correct. And, just because someone's last name, for instance, Stephen Binyard, he wasn't enslaved by anyone whose last name was Binyard. He was enslaved by a gentleman named Philip Gibbons. So that makes it difficult because many people assume, well, the last name was that of the enslaver. Well, I mean, sometimes, but sometimes people change their names. And sometimes their last name has nothing to do with who enslaved them. So you just have to be really resourceful when you're doing your research.
Okay, well, I know that we didn't get to every single question that was asked, particularly some of the more specific ones, unfortunately. But, I hope we did at least touch on a number of the main themes that you guys were asking about. But unfortunately, we've more or less run out of time. So I really want to thank you, Kimberly, for sharing.
You're welcome. You're very, very welcome.
Experience with us. And we're really glad that you were able to join us here at MPT for a Maryland look at finding your roots.
Can I mention one thing before we sign up? If everyone watching, if you go to Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter, Finding Your Roots and Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., we have a series of videos out right now. I think there's 10, where we're giving out tips, how to start your research, how to approach foreign research, how to organize your research. And all of these videos are available for free, and there's new videos being released every week. So check those out if you have a chance.
That's fabulous. And for some of you who asked there were a couple questions with pretty specific Maryland questions. Feel free to go to the Maryland Genealogical Society website, to the Maryland State Archives website, and take a look at what we have to offer. Feel free to send an email to us at MGS with some of your more specific Maryland questions. Again, thank you very much, Kimberly. We appreciate it.
You're
And thank
welcome.
you all
Thank
in
you
the
so much.
audience for being with us tonight.